Hello and welcome to everybody showing up here. We appreciate your time. Today's webinar is just going through our Azure deployment of, or automating your Azure deployments of DevOps. My name is Nick Craig. I'm a sales executive here at AlphaBold, and I am joined by Tayeb Ali, who is our VP of Consulting, and he'll be taking us through a couple demos today as well. Next slide, please. So, how many of you face the ever-growing need to develop and deploy features and products faster and faster? It's the only way to keep up in this world. And to accomplish this, you'll need automation so you can keep up the speed while maintaining quality. However, automating the entire process can be daunting, as I'm sure many of you know. Today, we will go over how this difficult task can be overcome by looking at what DevOps is, why it's necessary, and how DevOps accelerates delivery while maintaining reliability and quality of your products or services. Then we'll go over Microsoft Azure DevOps services, its features and tool chains, and how it can accelerate product delivery and collaboration. Next slide, please. All right, companies today are tasked with staying ahead of the curve by continuously innovating and delivering new features and services. On the slide, you'll see some pretty recognizable logos who have come in and thrown a wrench into their industries. Netflix completely pushed out Blockbuster, Lyft and Uber have disrupted the taxi industry, and Twitter has changed the way we get our news and media. As you can see, half of the Fortune 500 companies from 2000 are now replaced by organizations that use technology to deliver faster and better at lower costs. Next slide, please. So how do you ensure that your company stays ahead of the curve? Having developers who are efficient and collaborate is great, but it's not enough. Code needs to be realized in functioning products that customers can use. Not only that, but products need to be reliable, scalable, and secure. Next slide. As with producing anything, when increasing speed, the quality usually suffers. Standard methods need to be rethought in order to innovate faster. Traditionally, deployments have been manual by nature and organizational structures, processes, and tools have been siloed. This lends itself to human error, which leads to high failure rates when changes are implemented and longer times to recover from outages. To try to avoid running into more of these situations, we traditionally implement further controls via more manual processes and approval gates. But this doesn't improve overall system reliability. It introduces long lead times for changes and low deployment frequency. This is where DevOps comes in, and this is where I'm going to pass it off to Tayeb.
Thank you so much, Nick. Hi, everyone. Just to build upon the slide that Nick shared with you, where we looked at lots of Fortune 100s that are nowhere to be seen now, I think it stems from the fact that the end user, their mindset has changed. And technology firms, they have not been able to keep up from the pace standpoint with that change in the mindset of the end users. And same process applies to DevOps as well. Traditionally, DevOps used to be the process of building code and releasing it onto the production servers. But now it is more of a three-step process, which involves people, process, and products. And the process is develop, deliver, and operate. And it's more of a continuous flow that has to be in play for us to be able to achieve the success that we need to do in this day and age. When we talk about people, it's developers, but it's customers as well. And those customers can be your end users, they can be your partners, they can be your vendors, whoever is using your product in whatever capacity. And process is very, very important because that is what will bridge that gap between your end users and your development teams and technology firms. You will have to build some sort of a process where you could listen to their feedback. You could have a process in place where you could prioritize that feedback. That feedback could convert into features. Those features could then be broken down into storyboarding and tasks and work items that would eventually then be used by your team to deliver functionality. And as that functionality is being delivered, obviously there is this expectation of the end users in this day and age that they want to see those changes fast Otherwise, you will lose out to your competitors. So then you have to have automation around delivery. And then we go into the product aspect, which is the operation, and which is how your product will perform when it is live and what the user experience would be. And that needs continuous improvements as well, so that you could be ahead of your competition. So a DevOps process now involves a lot more than a traditional DevOps process did, say, 10 years ago. And the companies who are able to understand that and put that in function, they are successful. And those that have not been able to do that are probably the Fortune hundreds of 2000. So moving on to the next slide here, this is more of a granular approach to the people, process, and product, a combination that I talked about in the previous slide. So let's see what it means from the DevOps process. So we are already familiar with the development. Obviously, the key features need to be developed. But then we go into this build and test cycle. And one misnomer or idea that surfaces every now and then, especially with agile methodology, is maybe the QA is not as important, or at times to an extent where end users can be part of that QA process. I feel that the mindset has changed from the standpoint of the features that the end users need, but the expectation has not gone down from the quality standard standpoint. So QA process and testing does not need to be an afterthought. It has to be part of your DevOps process. We'll talk about that more. But then you go into the deploy process. So you want to be able to deploy quickly. You don't want to have a separate deployment team that takes hours and hours to get the developed code onto your production servers. And once it is deployed successfully, then you go into the operate mode where you're operating, and that's where monitoring and learning, and based on that feedback that is coming in, planning and tracking comes into play. So once you have this complete cycle rolled out and it's kind of a working machine, well grooved in, then you can say that you have an automated DevOps process that sets up your product team for success. Today, we are going to focus more on the Azure DevOps. Our DevOps team can perform DevOps operation on multiple platforms. It's just that the topic for this webinar is Azure, which in itself offers a lot of tools so that this whole process could be automated easily. It allows you to innovate at scale, and it helps you with the tools that are available that Microsoft has built upon over the years. So there are some traditional tools that Microsoft used to be really strong in, and then there have been some acquisitions such as GitHub that has allowed them to bridge some of the gaps. But if you look at the three different stages, the develop, deliver, and operate, from the develop standpoint, Microsoft always had obviously Visual Studio, and now they have Visual Studio Code as well, that allows developers to be able to develop quickly and download packages. It can work in a distributed manner. With GitHub, obviously, it is allowing them to accelerate the collaboration, especially with the open source development community. And then you have Azure DevOps that can help you accelerate delivery. And there are lots of different artifacts within that deliver stage that you see, from Azure boards all the way to test plans. I'll cover all of those in more detail since that is the core topic that we are covering. But then the last part, which is the operate stage, you can see that there is tons of features available with Azure from the monitoring, security, automation standpoint that makes it a robust platform that can be used for your DevOps needs. And that's what we're going to look into. We'll also be showcasing some of the demonstrations, like Nick said. We have 3 demonstrations. We have a demonstration for IaaS model, where we'll be deploying to a VM. We have a demonstration for PaaS, which is platform as a service. So we'll be using Azure App Service to deploy. And then we obviously also have a SaaS model in which we'll be showing you how DevOps can be effective. So if you look at different Azure DevOps services, as you can see, we have multiple services, and each of them offers its own specific functionality that enables you to combine all of these together to have that combination of people, process, and product. If in isolation you look at some of these, they obviously cover one aspect of your DevOps, but in order to be effective, you have to be able to map that whole process across all of these services so that you could have end-to-end automation of your DevOps. We are going to go through each one of these in a bit more detail. And then in our demonstrations, we'll be focusing more on the Azure pipelines as to how they can be used for the automation of your DevOps process. So let's start with Azure boards. So they allow teams to manage the software projects better. They have now a ton of rich set of capabilities, including native supports for Scrum as well as Kanban. They have customizable dashboards that you can see. You have queries that you can run. You can track work by work items, as you can see as one of the key features listed there. You have boards, you have backlogs where you can go in and you can do your backlog grooming sessions if you're using Agile as a methodology. You can obviously group your work items and your features and your epics into sprints so that you could track progress. And then at part of each sprint, all of this can then be integrated with some of the other services that you saw, where a work item can be linked to your deployment and can be deployed through different methods that we are going to cover in the demonstrations. So it's all integrated, it's all in one place, rather than you having to go to different services and different platforms to achieve this. The second one is Repos. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with version controls. Microsoft offers two types now. One is the Git, which is more like a distributed version control. And you can also have team foundation servers, mostly in enterprise settings where you want centralized version control. For those who are not familiar with version control, it's just a way to track your changes in your code, but it's very, very important. I think all of us who have done development have gone through cases where we've lost our code because it wasn't checked in. So the idea of a version control is that it just takes a snapshot of your code and it allows you to retrieve the code in case something happens, and you're able to permanently not only store the original snapshot, but you're also able to track changes and commits onto that. So you can recall any version of your code and you can deploy any version onto your production instance if something goes wrong. So very, very important, of course, from the development standpoint. Azure DevOps Repos obviously has lots of key features that it offers. Obviously, it has now incorporated all the Git features as well that were available as part of the GitHub. I'm not going to go through these, but I'm pretty sure you're familiar with most of these. You can have obviously local commits, and then you can push them to the server. You can have your whole branching strategy. And our team works with our customers to help with all of that. The only reason I'm sharing this is branching, obviously, there are multiple ways you can go about that. And it depends upon your needs with respect to your products and how you want to be able to push them out to your end users. But you can use these artifacts just for your specific needs and tailor them so that they work for you as an organization. Moving on to Azure Artifacts. So this is a nice service as well. They're mostly used to help manage dependencies and provide tools to ensure immutability and performance of components. So essentially what they have done is they have introduced this concept of multiple feeds that you can use to organize and control access to your packages. So if you are familiar with some of the ones listed there, like NuGet, NPM, each one of them is a single feed now. And you can use it to publish packages as well as bring those packages into your Azure pipelines where you can reuse them rather than reinventing the wheel. There are different types. There are build artifacts and there are pipeline artifacts. Build artifacts are mostly used for you to build the file outputs that would then be used in your pipeline artifacts, where you can then move those files around, you can push them into different environments. And then you have these pre-built packages that you can download from not only some of these, but you can also download these packages from Evan and some of the other public and private sources that are available. Obviously, the key benefits are that you can create and share your packages. You can add pre-built packages to your pipeline. So like I said, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And this is what will then enable you to have your continuous integration and deployment cycles. So moving on, this is where all the fun stuff happens. So essentially your pipelines. where you would be automatically building as well as executing, in some instances, your automated test codes. And we have an example of that for the demo today. And you will have all of that coupled into your pipeline. So you could have all the steps defined where your developers, they go in, they edit the code, they check it in. As soon as that happens, it can trigger your build pipeline. That would then instantiate your release pipeline. That would then end up, if you have test plans as part of that, then it can execute those. And you can have approvals, processes incorporated into that. You can generate emails. So again, it's more of not just the tasks that you're doing, but also that you can collaborate effectively around those tasks. And I'm going to cover a lot of this in the demonstrations that we will cover today. And the last one, the last service that I want to talk about is the test plans. So there are multiple ways that you can go about it. And probably some of you who have been part of the QA teams or have been part of the whole QA cycle, that is an essential part of DevOps. You're familiar with manual testing, you can do automation testing, you can do user acceptance testing, your unit testing. You obviously have your stakeholders, and you need to have a process in place to incorporating their feedback in as well. This is not something that we're going to cover in a lot of detail, but like I said, I do have one demonstration in which we'll be showcasing a use case where we have some Selenium-based automated test scripts that you will see in context of our pipeline for the SaaS model of deployment that we will cover. So with that, I want to go into the demonstrations, but before I do that, I wanted to just do a quick comparison between Azure and AWS. The idea of this comparison is not to showcase how one is better than the other, but I do want to highlight that in instances where you are already using some of the Microsoft products, such as say Microsoft SQL Server or Microsoft Windows servers, there are multiple advantages that you can gain from using Azure DevOps. So again, if you have the team that has the skill set for both, make sure that you use the right platform for your deployment strategy. You don't have to always go with one. We work with a lot of enterprise customers where they're using AWS and they're also using Azure. So you there's no need to be married to one of them. But in certain instances, obviously, Azure would make more sense. And I have some price comparisons in the subsequent slides. But one thing that really stands out in here is if you are thinking about hybrid capability, where you have some of your VMs running locally, but you also want to be able to leverage the scalability of the cloud. And as you scale, you push some of your code onto the cloud and you leverage that. In those instances, what happens is that if your code requires SQL Server or Windows Server, then you have to buy those licenses separately. For example, you're on AWS. With Azure, Microsoft has this hybrid licensing model where you can extend your licensing using the assurance program onto Azure Cloud. So that I think is a huge differentiator between the two. And obviously, even if you're not doing that, even if you're just using the cloud to run your code, which uses some of the Microsoft services, again, like Windows Server or your SQL Server, both as an IaaS or platform as a service, there's still lots of monetary gains to be achieved if you're using Azure there. And some of those are quantified in this slide. So this is just a comparison. On the left, you see the Windows Server. On the right, you see SQL Server as PAS. In the next slide, you see the SQL Server as an infrastructure as a service as well. So you can see that there's a huge difference in the comparison, which makes sense because obviously these are Microsoft products and Microsoft can couple them together with their offering to make it more palatable for its customers. So with that, we're going to go into our demonstrations. So just give me 1 second here. All right. So like I said, the first one that I will be using for the sake of this demonstration is the infrastructure as a service. So we have a VM that I will be deploying this to. So what you see right now is the Azure DevOps user interface. On the left, you can see that you have the boards that I talked about. I have here a story as well as a work item that I'm going to showcase in the second demo today. Then we have obviously all the boards and the backlogs and the sprints. So I can go to the sprint view and I can look that, okay, this is my iteration number one or sprint number one. And I have this in the new status right now. I can move it to active. Once it's done, I can move it to resolved and so on and so forth. Obviously, I have also my repos, which, like we discussed, we have multiple options here. I'll be using Git for the sake of the demonstrations that I'll be doing. I'll come to this in a second as I get to the demo. Then I have my pipelines. So we'll be focusing mostly on the build and the release pipelines. So obviously, you have the environments, you can have your task groups, your deployment groups. We won't be going into the details of those. You can have your test plans. So if you have any test plans that are part of your application development as well as deployment, they can be listed in here. And last but not least, obviously, you have these packages that you can use as part of your the build artifacts as well as the pipeline artifacts that you have in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my repo, and here I'm going to use an example of, it's a very basic example that is available online as well from just the Docker Hub perspective, but I'm going to showcase this in more in context of Azure. So you can see I have two kind of services. I have a service here that is providing me my products, which is built in Python. So here is my list of products that it returns. And then I have my very simple index.php that just displays these products that are being returned here. So if I go in here and I refresh it, you can see that I have this page index.php running here. It is returning me these products and they're listed in here. So what we are going to do for the sake of this demo is we are going to go in and we're going to make a quick change to this file. And I'll show you the end-to-end deployment process. I just come in here and I say DevOps is awesome. Sorry, can't type. And I'm going to hit commit. As soon as I do this, it is going to instantiate my build pipeline. And I'm going to go to that in a second, but I want to show you some of the Docker related configuration that I have in here. So I have obviously a Docker file, one here that is pulling the Python from Docker and putting it in there as part of the configuration. Here I have the Apache server, and obviously I have my build and release Docker compose file. So this is the build one, but you can see in here that it is building my Python service. It is putting it into a certain location, configuration of which port it should be running on, and then storing it in my ACR as an image. And this is the second one. And then obviously I have my release one, which is just taking these images and then it is putting them in, and the port configuration for that. Now I'm going to go and show you. So as soon as I clicked, I have obviously my pipeline set up. So you can see that this is the one that is running right now. So if I open up this build pipeline and go to my build job, you can see that it is pulling in the information, it is doing the build process, it is going to then push these services onto the ACR, and then it is copying my release file so that it is ready for the release pipeline to be instantiated and used as part of the deployment. At any time, I can look at the raw log file as well. And obviously, it gives me the feature set compatibility where I can go and I can look at every action that is being performed in here. So it is very helpful. I'm going to go back in here and show you. If I go into the edit pipeline mode here, just to show you the artifact. So you can see that there is a lot that comes with Azure DevOps that is already done for me. So for example, this build service for Docker Compose, it's a existing task that I'm using. So if I click on these tasks, you can see I have all of these pre-built tasks, not just for Microsoft related technology set, but also for, like you're saying, for seeing for the build services for some of the other products. And then you have these utilities, you have these packages. So you can just use them and you can pull lots of packages from NuGet, NPM, Maven, and all that is available to you, so you don't have to start from scratch. But if I open it up here, you can see very simple configuration. I'm giving it the name. I am using my Azure Container Registry here, and then I'm giving it the Docker Compose file that I showed you when we were looking at the repo. Once it has built this using the Docker file and the Docker Compose, then it is going to use this push service, push all of this onto my ACR. Then it is copying the release file, something I showed you in the steps as it was executing, and then I have the publish artifact. I also have obviously variables that I can define, and we'll talk about that a bit more in terms of the reusability of these pipelines. So you can use some of the features here where these variables can allow you to make some of the things more decoupled. So if you have a set of pipelines and tasks within those pipelines that you're using for your deployment, you could reuse them. Again, you have your triggers here, and I'm going to showcase this to you in a bit. And you can see that it is set for continuous integration. So that's the reason why as soon as I commit my changes to this web service, it started working. I have my multiple options that I can use in here. I have the image URLs, and then I have retention and history. That's just kind of a very quick overview of this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the release pipeline that got instantiated as I checked in my code here. So let me go on to the releases here. And this is the Docker to the hosted VM. And this is just the release. And you can see at 11:27, it kicked off. It has already finished, so you'll be able to see our changes as well. But let me click on this for a second. So if I come in here, before I obviously show you the components, let me look at the log again. And you can see I have the initialized job, it is downloading my artifacts, and then it is going through the deployment phase. And as I click on that, again, I have the log files available, and I can switch between tasks right from here. I don't have to go back and forth, and I can see the log of each one of them. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you this by showing different components of this pipeline at least. So as I go in here, this is obviously my trigger that kind of instantiated this process. So you can see in here that it says create a release every time a new build is available. So you kind of just set up this trigger here, and then within this build artifact, you set up what's the build pipeline that I want this release pipeline to be linked with. So you can see here that my build pipeline is Docker to the hosted VMCI, which is what I showed you previously. So it is available to us here, and then it has obviously features. You can pick up which version you want to pick to deploy, and then obviously it has your build artifact source elements. And if I click on the hosted VM, this is where, because like I shared, this is more of me deploying onto the virtual machine. So in here, I have configured the VM on which I want to be deploying this. It's a VM hosted on Azure that I'm using for this. And then I have some additional configurations that I can plan in here. But as I come in here, it's doing just a copy and then the deployment, which is using my Docker Compose to actually handle all of the deployment for this. And I have additional options that I can use again here as well. I can have my environment variables, I can have my output variables that can be used by subsequent tasks as well. So with that, if I go back to my service where I did this deployment on this VM, if you remember what I did was I went in there and I changed it from Azure DevOps working to Azure DevOps is awesome. So if I refresh it, and if I don't have the demo curse, which today is a good day, so you can see here that it says Azure DevOps is awesome. So it has just made those changes. Again, the idea is to show you the DevOps features, but you can obviously see as it is doing the build process, any changes that you make will eventually get deployed to this VM that you have. So this is the first example that I wanted to showcase, which was more for the IaaS example. The second one I have is PaaS. So if I go in here and show you, we have this gaming portal. Let me just refresh it here. And you can see we have lots of games listed in here. So the idea is that if you want to make any changes to this gaming portal, you can come in here and through our DevOps, you'll be able to deploy immediately to this portal. Obviously, I can come in here and I can start playing some of these games, which is going to be the rest of this demo. Just kidding. But essentially, the idea is that you can come in and you can handle larger changes than obviously what I was showcasing before. So what we are going to do is a very small change. We are going to just change this logo for this. So I'm going to go back to my Azure DevOps. I'll go back to my repos here. So I'm going to pull in here now this app service deployment. So for this one, like I said, it's more of a platform as a service. So I'm using Azure App Service to launch this web application. And here I have all the code. In order to show you the changes to this, I'm going to just do a change with my Visual Studio. So I'm going to open that up. Give me 1 second here. So as part of the preparation for this, what I've done is that I have this logo file that you saw. Should have seen at least. Okay, so I have this logo file, and then I have my actual logo file, which is this one, which you saw on the gaming portal. I'm just going to replace this with the other one. So I'm going to just rename this first. Say, okay, go ahead and this for demo. And I'm going to change the name of the other one, which is this guy, but I want this to be my new logo. So I'm going to say, and with that, I'm going to just check in, commit my code. So if I go in here, put in whatever, commit all. And once this is committed, I'm going to go back to my Team Explorer and I'm going to sync this with Git. So I'm going to push this out. So it says pushing the current branch. So it's now pushed this. If I go back onto my logo file here, I should be able to see my changes. So if I click on this and I see history, I should see that just now I have made a change to this file. So as I did this, just like the previous demonstration that I shared with you, I have the build pipeline and the release pipelines already configured for this. So it should have instigated my build pipelines. I'm going to go to the pipelines. And in this case, you can see that my build pipeline is running right now. I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to first show you different components of this one as well. So if I go back here, I click on I'm on my run, sorry about that. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to open this one up. So I'm right now in my pipeline and I'm going to go in here. And this is where I can show you edit pipeline. So you will see that because I'm using Azure App Service, there are lots of pre-built components. There's not much that I have to do as part of this. So I'm going in here and I'm just using this and it's all ready for Azure pipelines and my code is ready to go. I have all of this pre-built in there that I can use. So this is kind of cool from that standpoint. If I go back to my build that just completed now, I'll be able to showcase to you the different logs. So for example, if I click on this, you see that all I'm doing is I just had one file that changed. So it's just taking those files, publishing my artifacts. And if I go to the release pipeline now, this is my latest release pipeline. So if I go in here, you can see the artifacts that I have, and I can again click on the logs and it will show me it initialized the job, downloaded the artifact and deployed it. If I come in here and I refresh, probably will have to do Control F5. You can see that my logo has changed. So this is a lot more simpler because from Microsoft technology stack standpoint, obviously with Azure App Service, I just have this Azure App Service deploy, and it's taking care of a lot of heavy lifting for me. Again, that's the benefit of using platform as a service rather than the VM, because I don't have to really control many of the variables as part of this. But again, an important aspect from that standpoint, if I go back to the edit pipeline here, you will be able to see similar artifacts as you saw before, but obviously the jobs are different. Here I am using deploy Azure App Service, which is a pre-built task that is available to me. So I can just use that and I am just configuring all of my settings in here. And you can see I'm giving it a name, web apps on Windows, and I can configure all these settings in here and just get my deployment done. So a lot easier to handle that and manage all of your changes if you're using the pre-built artifacts that are available as platform as a service from the deployment standpoint, but know that the repos as the pipelines that we have, they lend themselves not just to the feature set that is available to platform as a service, but like I showed you, you can use more complicated deployment models. You can have your Docker Compose files, and you can have all of your configurations, you can have all of your images, and all of that can be deployed all together. And that leads to me for the third demonstration that I want to cover, which is software as a service. So in that instance, what I'm doing is, and this is interesting because we have a product, it's called Dynamics 365 CRM, Customer Relationship Management System, which is an online system. So this is where I have that open. What I'm going to showcase to you is how we can do deployments for them as well. So in here, you can see I have my source and my destination. So I'm using this AlphaBold 3 as a source and AlphaBold AI 0 as a destination. So this is my source. You see this form. It has the primary contact in here and it doesn't have anything on the right here. Versus my destination, it doesn't have that primary contact and it has this bunch of stuff. So as I finish this deployment, what I'm doing is I'm pushing this form over to this form using, again, DevOps. So what we have done as part of this is we have this PowerShell script. And as part of this script, we have put in the configuration. And because it's software as a service, so you have to be able to leverage the inbuilt artifacts of that platform and automate those from the DevOps standpoint. This is exactly what we are doing here. So if I'm going to just make a small change and trigger it because it usually takes a little bit of time, but then I'll walk you through different components of it. So if I go into edit here, and the process is the same, you just come in, you commit, and it will instigate the build pipeline, and then from there it will go into the release pipeline. So as I commit this and I go to my pipelines, you will see that it has now instantiated my Microsoft Dynamics 365 build pipeline. But I want to really spend some time and show this to you. So if I go in here, again, this is where the power of the platform comes in. Even for this, although it's a proprietary software as a service, but I was able to use some of the pre-built tools that are out there for us to leverage some of the artifacts that are intrinsic to the platform that we are using, which in this case is Dynamics 365 CRM. So for example, I have in here, there's a concept of solution for CRM. So you have a solution that has all of your changes. What we need to do is we need to put this form into this solution for it to be deployed onto our destination, which is this. So as part of the DevOps process, we have these NuGet packages that are available to us, which allow us to pull the solution as part of the build process. It builds the whole thing and can deploy it. So we didn't have to build this from scratch, even for a software as a service kind of deployment. Now, I know most of the companies, they do not tend to use DevOps for SaaS models, but I can tell you that based on a recent experience, not just for a customer relationship management system, but even for your ERP systems, companies are investing to making sure that they could do the end-to-end automation of the deployment process. So that's how streamlined you can make the process be. And one of the benefits of this is obviously when you talk about line of business applications that have critical impact on the businesses, you need to have all the provisions from approval standpoint. What I'll show you, if I go to my release pipeline for this one, it's kind of waiting for me to come in and approve. So if I come in here, approval was rejected by one of the resources. Let me see if this is the most recent one. I think I'm still waiting for my build pipeline to finish here. So give me go back in here, open this up. So this job, yeah, I think it's still finishing it up. So once it has checked it out, then it will be able to deploy it, and only then my release pipeline will instantiate. And once my release pipeline instantiates and has the right timing, so now I think it is going. So you can see that it is in the deployment step, and it will be waiting for my approval here. So you can see it's saying pending approval. Only if I go in and I approve this, that it is going to just go ahead and deploy. And one thing I also want to cover in here is you can see that as I push this approval in, I have in here a step which is sanity. So what we have done is we, as part of the deployment on this CRM, have some Selenium-based test cases that are grouped and pushed onto a VM. And I'll show that to you in a second here. And those test cases need to trigger and they need to be successfully executed for the deployment to finish. If I go, while this is executing, if I go into the edit pipelines here, you can see that I have obviously the deployment tasks. Let me just click on this and I can show you again that we are using some pre-built artifacts. To automate this, I have my PowerShell script, and then I have my Microsoft CRM tool installer that I can use and can take that information. It can import a solution, which is again something that needs to be done for CRM solutions. But if I go back to my pipeline here, if I go into Sanity, here I am telling this system that it needs to execute some of my test scripts. So if I go into the run test, it is telling it to execute this test run.batch file, which is a file that has my Selenium package, and then it gives that package whatever tests I wanted to execute. And within this pipeline, I'll be able to track whether my test cases they've executed successfully or not. So if I open up the executing pipeline again, it's still going though. So as it finishes here, I'll be able to show you the sanity. Again, I can click on the logs, and as I go into the logs, it shows me at which step it is right now. You can go into initialize jobs, and you can go through all of these tasks just like you could do for some of the other build pipelines that I was showing you. Now, from the SaaS standpoint, I also want to highlight that this automation can be huge because, especially for the product that I am showcasing this to you for, it can take you up to hours to finish your deployment based on the size of your solution. And then you have to obviously sit there, you have to do manual steps in order to make it work. Versus when you automate that and you have everything pre-configured and you're using DevOps build processes for this, then you can limit it down to less than 5 to 6 minutes. And based on that, it also obviously automates the end-to-end process. And also it can generate reports for you from the test standpoint. So as it executes our sanity tests, I'll be able to show you that what it does, it keeps a track of which tests have successfully completed, which tests have failed. And if a test has failed, then obviously you can have a rollback mechanism in place for this as well. So what we are expecting again is that as it finishes, this form, as I'll come, this is, as you can see, it's AlphaBolt 3. When I'll come on AlphaBolt AI 0 and I'll refresh, this form should be reflected here. The thing to note would be this primary contact field, and you have nothing on the right here, versus here we have some stuff and we don't have that primary contact field. So let's go back in here and wait. So you can see this has succeeded. Now my sanity is in progress. And if I look at the logs here, you can see it gives me a nice pictorial representation. So right now it is saying that 1 test is in progress, 0 have succeeded and 0 have failed. And again, if it serves me, if I go in here, this is where it is going to execute my test script. So let's give it a second here to see how it goes. And I think I can probably reopen that one more time. Yeah, it's still going.
And Tayeb, this is in progress. We did have one question that came through, and I believe you answered it, but I want to make sure that it's covered. And that question was, is there a way to reuse the pipeline built for deploying the microservices?
The short answer to that is it depends. But the idea is that as you build your pipelines, it's about how you decouple your configurations, right? Because if you're trying to reuse your pipeline, if the idea is to just reuse it as is for the same service, obviously that can be done. But with pipelines, you have this import and export features where you can export a pipeline with all its tasks and artifacts and re-import that in. Obviously, as you do that, if you don't have the configuration decoupled and stored maybe in a separate file or in some sort of a database, then you'll have to make changes there. But to a larger extent, yes, all the tasks that we have, if you've spent a lot of time building those, you should be able to reuse them. And obviously in your ideal configuration, you will have that going on to the dev. You'll have a dev, QAU/UAT or prod servers that you're pointing with that. So obviously that configuration needs to be changed. But yes, there are provisions as part of Azure DevOps to be able to reuse those artifacts that you have built.
Thank you.
All right, so my Sunday testing has finished. So you can see it says 1 succeeded, 0 failed, which is great. So I'm going to go in here now and I'm going to do Control F5. This is what we've been waiting for. So I go in and you can see that my changes from this form, 3 have been deployed on AI0. So I have my primary contact in here and don't have any of the changes that I had. So this is kind of the third demo that I wanted to cover. And with that, I'm going to transition back to my slide deck. Let me go to the next slide here. All right, Nick, you already asked me one question. Do you have any additional questions for me?
Yeah, we did have one other one, and it's more in relation to us. So the question is, does AlphaBold transition the DevOps process to their internal IT support after everything's set up?
Yeah, so that's a very valid and relevant question. So if you, for some of our customers, we work in a very collaborative manner. Like I said, it depends upon how you go about building your pipelines. But we believe in obviously building them in a decoupled fashion. So the idea is that once we build this for you, you can either work closely with your IT team if you need our help with that, or even if we are doing it on our own, the whole process is to transition it out so that your IT could support this going forward. We're just building these reusable components that you can then continue to use. That's the whole idea of Azure DevOps anyways, to automate that process. And you can simplify it to a point where you're just having your team pressing some buttons to get your code from your dev to your UAT. And then you can have multiple processes in there where you can have, just like I showcased to you, you can have different approvals that need to be done before it could then be deployed into production. But yes, we totally work with your IT team and support them, as well as if we do some artifacts that need to be done, especially for your software as a service, because that requires a little bit of intrinsic knowledge of the products, and we do specialize in a lot of line of business applications. So we can definitely help you there as well, and then transition that over to your IT team so that they could continue with that.
All right, great. That was all the questions that we had.
All right, I'm gonna just transition it back to you, Nick.
All right, thank you very much. So as far as next steps, one, I hope you guys found something informative out of this. And if you did, or you're still interested, let's have a quick chat. We can jump on a quick phone call or just via email and kind of discuss what your current development processes are, then go over your current QA processes, and then we can try to explain some areas for improvement for you. And from that point on, we could just partner up and get you guys rolling. So on our next slide, we have our contact information. So if you do want to get a hold of us, here is where you can do that. And want to say thank you to everybody who took some time to attend today. We really do appreciate it. And we'll follow up with you with a recording so you can review it later. Have a great day.